The night had the kind of uneasy stillness that comes before a storm. Neon lights flickered across the rain-streaked windows of the old roadside diner, painting streaks of pink and gold on the polished tiles. Inside, the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation blended with the soft tunes from an old jukebox. Amid the red leather booths and chrome counters stood Claire, a tired young waitress in a faded pink uniform, her hair pulled back neatly, her smile stretched just enough to hide the trembling in her hands. But behind that practiced smile was fear, a fear that had followed her for weeks. Every night, as she worked her double shifts to make rent, she noticed him, a tall man with piercing eyes and a smirk that made her stomach twist. He'd sit in the corner booth, never ordering more than a coffee, just watching her. Every time she walked by, she felt his gaze crawl over her like cold fingers. Every time she stepped outside after closing, she saw his car parked across the street. She had reported it once, but the police brushed it off as coincidence. "Unless he threatens you, there's nothing we can do," they'd said. But tonight, something was different. The man had followed her again. She saw his car pull into the parking lot moments after her shift began. Her heart raced, her hands shook so hard she nearly spilled coffee on a customer. And that's when he walked in. A mountain of a man with a gray beard, tattooed hands, and a leather vest that bore the words, "Hell's Angels." His presence shifted the energy of the whole diner. Conversations quieted, eyes followed him. He sat alone in a booth, his heavy hands folded on the table, the dim light glinting off the silver rings on his fingers. Claire had seen bikers before. Most people avoided them. But tonight, something in her gut told her she needed help, and that help might come from the unlikeliest place. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story of courage, kindness, and unexpected heroes, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Exposed Tales if you believe in second chances, human kindness, and standing up for what's right. Claire approached his table cautiously, the metal coffee pot trembling slightly in her grasp. She offered a polite smile, asking if he wanted a refill. He nodded, his eyes calm, steady, and kind in a way she didn't expect. She poured the coffee, glanced around nervously, and then leaned in close enough that only he could hear her whisper. "He won't stop following me," she said, voice cracking with fear. "The man in the corner, he's been watching me for weeks." The biker's eyes sharpened instantly. He turned his head just enough to see the man sitting near the back, then looked back at Claire. His jaw tightened. He gave her a small, almost reassuring nod. "Go back to work," he murmured. "I'll take care of it." Claire walked away, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The biker, whose name patch read Ray Grizz Dalton, was no stranger to darkness. He'd been part of the Hell's Angels for 25 years, seen violence, betrayal, and pain that would break most men. But somewhere along the road he'd learned that strength wasn't just about fists. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He watched as the man in the corner kept staring at the waitress, his lips curled in a smug grin. It was the look of a predator who thought no one would ever stand in his way. Ray sipped his coffee, calm and deliberate. Then he stood up. The sound of his chair scraping the floor made every head turn. The entire diner went silent as he walked, slow, steady steps, toward the corner booth. The man's grin faltered. Ray stopped at his table, towering over him. "You got a problem with the waitress?" he asked, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. The man tried to act tough, smirking. "Who's asking?" Ray leaned in, close enough for the man to see the fire in his eyes. "Someone who doesn't like cowards." The air grew thick. The waitress froze near the counter, her coworkers staring wide-eyed. The man tried to stand, puffing his chest, but Ray's hands shot out, slamming him back into the booth with a force that rattled the salt shaker. "You've been following her," Ray growled. "Now you're gonna apologize, and then you're gonna leave. Tonight. Forever." The man opened his mouth to argue, but one look from Ray silenced him. His hands trembled as he muttered a shaky apology toward Claire, who stood frozen near the register. Then he grabbed his coat and stumbled out of the diner, disappearing into the night. Ray watched until the taillights vanished, then turned back toward Claire. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You're safe now," he said softly. But for Claire, safety wasn't just about one night. The fear didn't vanish overnight. She spent the next few days glancing over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, expecting that man to come back. But he never did, and every night Ray came back to the diner, not to intimidate, but to quietly make sure she was okay. He sat in his usual booth, ordered coffee, and gave her a nod of acknowledgement. Sometimes they didn't even speak, but she felt protected. For the first time in months, she could breathe again. As days turned to weeks, they began to talk. Ray told her about the roads he'd ridden, the brothers he'd lost, and the mistakes he wished he could undo. Claire told him about her dreams, how she once wanted to go to nursing school but had to give it up after her mom got sick. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, yet somehow they understood each other. One night after closing, she sat across from him, tired but smiling. "You didn't have to help me that night," she said softly. "You could have just ignored." Ray looked down at his coffee, swirling it slowly before replying. "Once upon a time, I did ignore it. When a woman needed help, I told myself it wasn't my problem. She didn't make it. I swore I'd never walk away again." The weight of his words hung in the air. That night, Claire realized that sometimes the people society fears the most carry the deepest scars and the biggest hearts. But fate wasn't done testing them yet. 2 weeks later, that same man came back. Not alone this time. He had 2 others with him, rough-looking men who stepped into the diner after closing hours when only Claire and one cook were left. The moment she saw them through the window, fear returned with full force. She backed away toward the counter, whispering Ray's name like a prayer. She didn't know it, but Ray was already outside, his bike parked near the door. He had come by, as he often did, just to check if she was safe before heading home. When he saw the men entering after hours, he didn't hesitate. The door slammed open, and the sound of his boots echoed through the diner. The men froze. Ray's voice cut through the silence like thunder. "I told you to stay gone!" The 3 intruders exchanged nervous glances, realizing they were outmatched. Ray stepped forward, his presence filling the room with an authority that came from years of surviving every kind of fight imaginable. "You lay a hand on her, and I swear, you'll regret it for the rest of your miserable lives." One of the men tried to lunge at him, but before he could take a step, Ray's fist met his jaw. He hit the floor with a thud. The others backed off immediately, their courage vanishing. They muttered curses and fled. Claire stood there, trembling, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming relief. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Ray turned to her, breathing heavily. "It's over," he said. "You're safe." But she shook her head. "No, Ray," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved me, twice." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you've done something that truly mattered. In the days that followed, word spread quickly, not just about the fight, but about what came after. The police arrested the stalker and his accomplices. The diner's owner, grateful beyond words, offered Claire a raise and safer working hours. And Ray, the man people once crossed the street to avoid, became something of a local legend. Yet he never bragged, never talked about what he'd done. He just kept showing up, sitting in his booth, drinking his coffee, and making sure the people around him were safe. Claire's life slowly began to change. The fear that had once controlled her was replaced by courage. With Ray's encouragement, she applied for nursing school again. When she got accepted, she cried, and so did Ray, though he tried to hide it behind his beard. On her last night before leaving town for her studies, she walked over to Ray's booth and handed him a small envelope. Inside was a photo, her in her pink uniform pouring him coffee, both of them smiling. On the back, she'd written, "For the man who reminded me that real angels still walk this earth." Ray didn't say anything. He just hugged her, tears glinting in his eyes. Months later, Claire would write him a letter saying she'd found a small apartment near her new school, that she was doing well, and that she still thought about that night. The night a biker became her guardian angel. And every now and then, as Ray rode his motorcycle down long, empty highways, he'd pull that photo from his jacket pocket, smile, and whisper, "Keep riding, kid. You made it." Because sometimes, the most unlikely people become the light in someone else's darkest night. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Exposed Tales, where real emotions meet unforgettable stories of courage and kindness. Special request, tell us in the comments, do you believe kindness can change a life? because sometimes all it takes is one brave soul to make the world a little better.